I cursed the day I sold that damn car, and then I cursed the twice damn day I bought that damn bucket. Damn car. I've dreamed of a Porsche all my life, and here I am, almost 30, with a 4-year-old Ford parked in front of my house and enough money in the bank to cover the difference. The difference between my old Ford and the much older, but still beautiful red Porsche 911 that I've been licking my lips at for the last 4 weeks every time I pass it in the garage in town. The registration number even had the letters GAD on it. Got it? George and Debbie. I talked to my wife, begged, cajoled, joked, and made every possible promise. And finally she agreed that we could spend our hard-earned savings on the object of my desire. I think that was my first mistake. Looking back, Debbie and I weren't exactly suited to the Porsche. The Ford was more our type, maybe a GTI or even an MX-5. But like I said, I've wanted a Porsche for so long that I couldn't wait to get behind the wheel once it was mine. God, George, Debbie smiled, getting into the car for the first time. I'm not sure I feel comfortable in such a car. You look beautiful, darling, I told her happily, smiling at my pretty young wife, imagining how she would look even better in a short skirt and revealing top than in the usual dresses she usually wore. That was probably part of the problem. Neither she nor I were fans of clubs or bright lights. We were both teachers at different schools in our small town in Bedfordshire, where we had both taught since leaving college. I worked there for almost 5 years, and Debbie, who was 2 years younger than me, was a little less. We met in college when I plucked up the courage to approach her freshman year and offer to share a blotter since it turned out we were the only ones in the class who were still using a real fountain pen. She looked scared at first, not knowing how to respond, not realizing that I was experiencing the same emotions. How we got to this point will remain a mystery, but we dated all that year, and it wasn't until our 6th date that I finally dared to kiss her. Debbie was a really pretty girl, only 5'2", with long brown hair that she almost always wore in a bun. She was slender and neatly built in a homely sense. Her breasts were not very large, but very firm and elastic, which I was able to confirm much later. As you might have guessed, I finished college, got a job in Bedfordshire, and when Debbie arrived a couple of years later, a wedding soon followed. So here my sensibly dressed wife and I are sitting in our Porsche, and don't we feel great? I went on our first trip surprised by the power available compared to my previous cars and was delighted. And I continued to enjoy it for the next 4 months, which was inconvenient since the 3-month warranty had already expired. When I first heard the noise, I ignored it, imagining it would just go away. The second time I couldn't pretend he wasn't there anymore, and by the time we got home from school that evening, we both knew something was wrong. A trip back to the garage where we bought the car didn't help much as we were referred to a specialist in Luton. Gearbox problem, mate, the oily mechanic told us with a sad look on his face. All the gears and bushings on these things. I wouldn't travel far with such a problem. You can imagine how dejected we both were. All our savings went into buying this damn thing. I have a spare in the back room, he encouraged us. If you leave the car with me, then everything will be ready by Wednesday. Well, at least that cheered us up a little, and Debbie hugged me and smiled a little in support. How much is it? I asked, feeling more confident. 3,000 for the box plus labor, he stunned us. 3,000. I cried out in disbelief, feeling cold inside at the thought of such an exorbitant amount. Yes, mate, he confirmed. 3,000 plus another 1,000 or so for labor and gaskets. Plus VAT, of course. Oh shit, our house was quite a sad place that evening, with Debbie trying not to blame me, although every time she looked at me, her eyes betrayed the tears she was trying to hold back, and it was killing me with shame for how much it had cost us my hobby. We can't afford this, you know, George, Debbie finally said. I know, honey, I agreed, feeling defeated. I'll ask the guy how much he'll give us for it. I'm sure everything will be all right, George, Debbie consoled me, although it was clear from her face that she understood perfectly well that everything would not be like that. Not interested, mate, the mechanic told me the next morning. As soon as the gearbox fails on such a car, it means that other problems will follow. I don't need such troubles. But what can I do? I begged. Pour thick oil into the box to muffle the noise and sell it, mate, he suggested without much interest. But I can't just sell it to someone knowing there's a serious problem, I objected. It wouldn't be fair. Then send it to auction, mate, he continued. That way you won't even have to see the poor guy who buys it. Thanks for nothing, I thought as I carefully drove the damn thing home that evening, praying that the noise wouldn't suddenly get louder and not knowing what to do. Debbie and I talked about it for several hours that evening, hating having to lie to someone but not knowing what else we could do. So the following Saturday, we bought some thick oil, and most of my Sunday morning was spent changing it, which was difficult at best. The following week, the Porsche was delivered to a local car auction in Bedford, and we waited. A call on Friday confirmed the good news that the car was indeed sold, but the bad news was that the top bid was much lower than what we paid for it. We certainly expected the auction price to be lower than what we paid, but it was still a hard blow. Well, this is the end of your dream for several years, dear, Debbie consoled me, looking at the used Volkswagen parked where the Porsche stood so proudly. Our savings were spent on this unsuccessful adventure. But at least you lived through it for a few weeks. Thank you, darling, I sobbed, hugged her, and pressed her to me. The main thing is that we are still together. Life returned to normal for 3 weeks. Our smart car coped with all the tasks assigned, taking us both to and from school every day. Of course, we were asked about the sudden disappearance of the Porsche that caused such a stir when it first showed up in my school's parking lot, but we brushed it off, saying that we simply changed our minds when we realized how much running costs would cost. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough and, frankly, a bit of a face-saver. Mr. Adams, the voice on the other end of the line demanded when I picked up the phone shortly after that evening. Mr. George Adams? He says, confirmed I. Is this Mr. George Adams who owned the Porsche 911 that was sold at auction last week? My legs felt weak and my stomach churned, knowing that damn Porsche was back to haunt us. Are you still there, Mr. Jones? The now threatening voice demanded. You sold it, I believe. Yes, I muttered in response to uncertainty. How can I help? I think you know what we're talking about, Mr. Adams, don't you? Said the voice, and my silence only confirmed it. And what are you going to do about it, Mr. Adams? Continued the man on the other end. What are you going to do with the non-functional gearbox that you sold me? Transmission, I asked, knowing full well that I was losing. What gearbox? I'll tell you this, Mr. Adams, he continued, ignoring my denial. We will come to you to discuss this issue. We got your address from your documents, and we'll be with you in half an hour, so you better think about what you're going to do about it. Before I could say anything, the phone went off, and I was left standing there, shaking. I called Debbie and told her what happened, and she burst into tears. I told you I shouldn't have bought that damn car, she sobbed. I knew it would lead to trouble. We were still standing there when, a quarter of an hour later, the doorbell rang. I sent Debbie into the other room and carefully opened the door, ready for my responsibilities to form partly in my mind as 3 men, big men, walked past me. So George, the middle one, with short cropped hair and a scar on his face, began to say, "Where's my money, you stupid bastard?" "What money?" I muttered in response, looking at his height of about 6 feet, massive build, and stern expression on his face. "You bought the car, we didn't declare the condition, so the gearbox is your problem." "How will a broken leg be your problem, you mean?" he answered rudely. "And this will only be the beginning." "What do you mean?" I muttered, horrified by our situation. "You won't." "Don't tease me, honey," he shouted at me, the anger in his dark, menacing eyes obvious. £10,000 exactly, and the car is yours again, but you'll have to pick it up in London, where the bloody gearbox is broken. This is what I paid for the damn thing, and this is what you're going to give me back. But I don't have £10,000, I told him. That's why I had to sell it. Well, you have half an hour to find them, honey, he threatened me, approaching me and looking straight into my eyes. But I can't, I answered as confidently as possible. You can't do that. That's enough, Jimbo. the leader said to the huge black guy standing next to him. But don't break anything just yet. I began to step back across the room as this nightmare in human form advanced towards me. I admit I was terrified, damn terrified. This Jimbo was even bigger than the first guy, with muscles that seemed like they had muscles of their own. His bald, shaved head only added to his intimidating appearance. I cried out in pain as he grabbed my arm and twisted it, lifting it behind my back until I thought it was going to break. "Get away from him, you rude people," my wife screamed as she ran into the room, unable to follow my instructions to stay away. "Leave him alone." "Well, what do we have here?" the leader said with a grin, looking at my pretty young wife. "You're cute, aren't you?" "Too thin, if you ask me," exclaimed the third goon, a long, thin slob. "But perhaps, dear." "But her breasts are pretty, apparently," the leader interjected. "I can't get a good look with that big sweater she's wearing." "Shut up, bastards," I shouted at them, but for my words I received even more pressure on my hand. "Leave him alone," Debbie pleaded as I cried out in pain again. "Break his damn arm, Jimbo," was the answer. "No, please don't. Please don't," my wife screamed as my screams turned into cries of agony. "Wait a minute, Jimbo," the leader ordered my tormentor, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I felt the pressure on my poor limb ease. "Take off your sweater, honey," he ordered my poor Debbie. "Let's see what you have there." "No, I can't," she sobbed in response, with horror on her face. "Under my sweater, I only have a bra." "So much the better," thundered the one who was holding me. "Come on, girl. Give us a show." "No," Debbie screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Break his arm, Jimbo," suggested the leader. "No, please, no," Debbie screamed in despair. "Okay, I'll take off my sweater." "Don't do this," I started, but was interrupted by another wave of pain that almost made me lose consciousness. My eyes filled with tears of pain and humiliation as I watched my wife hesitate, then reach for the hem of her sweater and slowly pull it over her head. She stood there, her beautiful, firm breasts covered only by her lace bra, her eyes downcast, too ashamed to look up. "Not bad for such a small chest," remarked the third thug. "I like small breasts sometimes," objected Jimbo, the black giant still holding me. "Especially small white breasts like this girl's." "I think I agree with Jimbo," the leader laughed, looking around at my half-naked wife. "These breasts look pretty good to me, and I think we should get a good look at them." My protest was cut off by another flash of pain, and Debbie just stood there, saying nothing and doing nothing as the three of them looked at her with grins on their cruel faces. "You know I can tell Mike to take your bra off for you, don't you, sweet girl?" the leader said to my poor wife. "And neither you nor your hubby can stop it." "I know," Debbie muttered, barely audible. "Sorry, what did you say?" Ted teased her. I didn't hear it properly. "I know you can, bastard," Debbie replied, looking into his eyes and straightening up. "Why don't you just do it?" "It's not so fun, honey," he explained. "I want you to take off your bra yourself. I want your hubby to see you baring your breasts for us, and I want him to feel ashamed for trying to deceive me." "No, I won't do it," Debbie replied, her voice shaking from emotions. "Christ, I love this," Ted said, addressing no one in particular. "I wonder how we can convince you." Debbie just hung her head, not knowing what to do. "Listen, little one," he continued after a few moments. "Take off your bra and we'll leave you alone for a while. I promise we won't hurt your husband." "You promise?" Debbie asked hopefully. "Do you really promise?" "I promise, darling," he replied, grinning wickedly, knowing that she had fallen for his bait. "Take off your bra and let us all feel your breasts, and we'll let your hubby go." "No groping," my wife shouted. "You didn't say anything about touching, just that I should take off my bra." "I will do it, but without touching." "Things are changing, I'm afraid, my little one," he continued to tease her. "Take off your clothes and let us touch you. It's not much I'm asking." Debbie gritted her teeth and refused, looking at him with hatred. "Okay, girl," he grinned, enjoying her discomfort. "Mike here doesn't seem all that interested in your little tits, even though they're cute, so we'll rule him out. Take off your bra, and only two of us will be able to touch them." "No, bastard, no," my wife screamed, shaking her head. "I won't do this." "Then just one of us, darling," he suggested with a grin, enjoying her humiliation. "Christ, how I'm enjoying this, guys." Debbie didn't say anything, just shook her head. "Listen, my beautiful," Ted continued. "Only one of us will get to play with these beautiful breasts, and you can choose who it will be. Jimbo or me, or even Mike if you want. How do you like it? That, or we'll break your hubby's arm," he added with an evil grin when she didn't respond. "Come on, girl, think about it." "Well, I definitely won't choose you," Debbie snorted, thinking she had outsmarted him. "Of course, dear," he answered with a grin. "I never expected it." "Well, who will it be, my beautiful? Jimbo or Mike?" "Jimbo," my wife whispered, and I felt something inside me snap. "No, Debbie," I cried in despair. "I have to," she screamed back, begging me not to interfere. "Please, Debbie, don't." "I must," she repeated. "Jimbo, so you chose?" Ted continued, enjoying our little drama. Lucky guy. No one spoke for a few moments. Three of them just smirked at my poor wife. "When should I do this?" she finally asked. "When you're ready, dear," he tormented her, placing all responsibility on her. Slowly, with her eyes downcast, she reached behind her and unclasped her bra, holding it in place for a moment before letting it fall, revealing her juicy little breasts that stood before us like two ripe apples, their tips quivering as she trembled with shame. Come on, do it," she sobbed when no one moved towards her. "What to do?" Ted teased. "What do you want us to do?" "You know what I mean," Debbie moaned through clenched teeth. "For God's sake, just do it." "Do what, my sweet?" He continued to torment her. "Tell us exactly what you want us to do." "Feel them," she sobbed. "For God's sake, feel my breasts." "I think she wants someone to feel her," Ted said to the other two. "Shut up," she shouted at him. "Jimbo, do it, please." But Jimbo didn't move. He still held me and knew full well that his boss was getting his way. "He seems a little busy, honey," Ted almost sang to my half-naked wife. "He can't let go of your hubby, and those beautiful breasts will be wasted on Mike." Debbie sobbed, her chest shaking even more, and Ted whistled with pleasure. "I'm staying, my dear," he continued. "You want me to take Jimbo's place?" "Yeah, just do it," she whispered, giving up. "Ask me nicely," he teased. "You just rejected me and hurt my feelings, so you're going to have to ask me properly." "Feel my breasts," Debbie said through clenched teeth. "Please tell me," Ted demanded, knowing he was in complete control of the situation. "Please feel my breasts," my wife whispered back. "Sorry, honey," he replied. "Speak louder so that I can hear you." Debbie looked at him with hatred in her eyes. However, she straightened up, put her hands behind her back, and pushed her bare breasts towards him. They looked great, so tempting. Damn it, I didn't want to look, but I just couldn't take my eyes off her naked torso. "Please, Ted," she said slowly and clearly. "Please feel my breasts." "Of course, dear," he replied with a grin, "since you asked so beautifully and clearly want it." With these words, he walked up to her, reached out, and took her left breast in his hand. Debbie closed her eyes and clenched her teeth, trying to keep it out. But it was too difficult, and eventually a moan pierced her lips, and she leaned forward, pushing her breasts towards him. "Can I kiss them, sweetie?" he asked her quietly. His whole mood seemed to change. Debbie opened her eyes, but registered nothing before nodding her head, throwing it back in passion as he leaned down and took her other sweet little breast into his mouth. This time the moan was louder and more focused, and she grabbed his head, pulling his mouth to her breast, pressing it hard against his captivating lips. "Christ," Mike laughed, watching this. "She may have small breasts, but she seems to be enjoying herself." "She's having fun," Jimbo added as Ted began to unzip her skirt. And all I could do was watch the horrific scene play out in front of me, desperately denying to myself that I was aroused. I can hardly believe that my innocent young wife could so easily succumb to such wanton behavior. My heart sank as her skirt, now free, slowly fell, crawled down her slender legs and fell to the floor, and I could hardly believe my eyes when she of her own free will came out of her and pushed her aside. "You don't like little white cotton panties?" Jimbo remarked, slightly easing the pressure on my hand. "Yes, Jimbo," his friend agreed. "They make her seem sweet and innocent despite her behavior." "I usually prefer women in high heels," Jimbo continued, as if discussing what model of car he wanted to buy. "But those little white socks look just wonderful on her, don't they?" Before I could process their remarks, Ted, the dirty bastard, slid one of his big hands over Debbie's stomach, his huge fat fingers playing with the elastic band of her panties. To my utter amazement and disappointment, my previously naive wife grabbed his wrist, but did nothing to stop his hand from completely disappearing into her rather large panties. "Oh God, please don't do this," she moaned, her own actions completely negating the likelihood of her words having any effect, and I had to stand and watch as this bastard groped my wife. I cannot describe the pain and hopelessness that gripped me. Then I heard a cell phone ring behind me, and to my surprise, Jimbo simply let go of me, freeing his hands to take the phone out of his jacket. By then, poor Debbie's panties were already halfway down her thighs. I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed, disgusted but mesmerized by the sight of my wife being stripped and groped. Jimbo was busy on the phone, and Mike wasn't paying attention to me, leaning forward trying to get a better look between my wife's legs. But all I could do was stand there with my mouth open, looking at this thug who was physically raping my wife's body right in front of me. "How does it feel, dear?" Ted teased Debbie. "Oh God, yes," she moaned, which was an outright lie. "Ted," Jimbo called, covering the phone microphone with his hand. "We have a problem, boss." "Can't you see I'm busy, Jimbo?" he complained, almost without looking up from Debbie's body. "This is Horsman," Jimbo explained with an expression that everyone seemed to understand except me. He got mad again. "What?" Ted exclaimed, releasing Debbie, who almost fell to the floor. "Horsman? Horsman? Is that bastard on the loose again?" "I'm afraid so, boss," Jimbo confirmed casually. "We have to calm him down before he kills someone in the club." "Damn him," Ted spat, looking at Debbie, who was still desperately holding on to him, still lost in her own feelings. "Sorry, love. I've got to go. Next time." Debbie's answer tore apart the last vestiges of my world. "It's okay, Ted," she told him, even smiling at the bastard. "I understand." I was left standing there, completely broken, as my wife, my naked wife, went to see off these three thugs who had just violated her body, forcing me to watch the whole terrible scene. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, probably longer, in a state of shock at what they could have done to her on the other side of the door, waiting for her to return. I knew I had to do something, somehow to react, but I was completely at a loss in a world that I did not understand. My wife, my previously shy and reserved Debbie, on the street, completely naked, with three strangers we've never seen before. I couldn't believe this was happening. I was paralyzed. Then I heard the front door slam, and, snapping out of my semi-trance, I hurried to look out the window, fearing that they might have taken Debbie with them. I was relieved to see the three of them get into a huge new Mercedes parked outside, and was able to calm down a little as they drove away. What does a person who can afford such a Mercedes do, buying an old used car, even if it is a Porsche? I didn't know I had no idea, but the thought still came to my mind. "I'm sorry, darling," she said quietly to me, returning, wrapped in a large towel that she found somewhere to cover her nakedness. "I think I got a little carried away." "Debbie," I almost sobbed. "How could you? How could you behave like this?" "I'm sorry, darling," she sobbed in response. "I already said I'm sorry." "But for Christ's sake, Debbie," I shouted at her, losing control. "You let him touch you. You let him touch you. You let him grope your breasts and finger you." "What could I do?" she screamed in despair. "They hurt you, and I thought they would break your arm or something." But, but, but there was no need to let him do all that, Debbie," I exclaimed. "There was no need to enjoy it, for God's sake." There I said it. What did you expect me to do, George? Debbie replied, losing her composure. That bastard kissed my chest. I couldn't help how it felt. I couldn't help but react to what he was doing to me. Damn it, George, I'm sorry if this upsets you, but it felt good and I lost control. But why did you go into the corridor with them? You were naked, for God's sake. I had no choice, dear. They forced me. You didn't really resist, did you? I blurted out, wanting to hurt her, perhaps unfairly, but I needed to throw out my pain. I didn't resist, Debbie screamed. What were you doing, you rag? You just stood there and watched while they forced me to take off my clothes. Your own wife, you did nothing to stop them. What could I do, Debbie? I sobbed in despair. That huge black bastard was holding me. He didn't hold you when they took me out into the hallway, did he? She shouted back. Where were you when Ted invited the other two to feel me up? Where were you when I had 3 pairs of hands on my naked body? I don't know, Debbie, I muttered miserably. Images of Debbie completely naked and surrounded by 3 men who could not push her hands away floated before my eyes. I was so shocked that I couldn't react. Well, don't blame me, bastard, she replied angrily. You insisted on buying this damn car, and now it's me and my body paying for it. There was a short pause as we looked at each other, rethinking our positions. Sorry, Debbie, I finally blurted out. I know it's not your fault. Thank you, she whispered, unable to look me in the eyes. At least it's something. Well, at least it's over, honey, I tried to console her. You think so? She asked sadly. Because I don't think so. Oh shit, she was probably right. The next few days were not easy for both of us. If I wasn't reliving the horror of Ted caressing Debbie's body, I was thinking about what those 3 might have done to her before they left. I just couldn't ask her about it, especially since she kept breaking down in tears every few hours. When the call we had been dreading finally came, it was, in a way, almost a relief. Why don't you and your beautiful wife, Debbie, come to our club tomorrow night? Ted suggested. I think I have a solution to our little problem. I would prefer not to come, I said, taken by surprise by his proposal. That, or we'll come to you again, he continued, making it clear that his proposal was an order, no matter how I looked at it, and this may not be so pleasant because I don't like wasting time. Okay, I'll come, I promised, seeing no other way out. Not just you, he barked. You and your beautiful wife. In fact, you don't have to come if you don't want to. We'll both come, I promised him, and took from him the address of a club called Yellow Pollen, which I had never heard of before. I hope you didn't report our visit to the police or anyone else, George. No, I answered, although only Debbie's fear of retribution held me back. Very reasonable, said Ted. Don't worry too much. I'm sure we can work things out. Damn it, early evening the next day found Debbie and me at the door of the aforementioned Yellow Pollen. This is a lap dancing club, George, Debbie said, reading the advertisement at the entrance. What is it? How can these dance? Oh, it's like a boys' club, I replied, wondering if we should run away and emigrate to Latvia or something like that. There's a picture of a girl dancing around some kind of pole, she continued, looking at the only poster by the door. Looks pretty fun. Yes, honey, I agreed with my naive wife, really not wanting to cross the threshold of this place, my heart pounding at the thought of what solution to our problem Ted could offer. Let's go in and get this over with, Debbie said cheerfully, grabbing my arm and pulling us both through the door. Are you members of the club? A suspicious-looking man in a cheap suit and a thin mustache asked us inside a gloomy establishment. No, we're here to see Ted, I told him, noticing with pleasure that Debbie now had a nervous look on her face and was holding on tightly to me. Mr. Walters said that someone would come, the guard muttered, looking my wife up and down as if he was assessing the goods. He said you were cute, and you are. Come on in. Before our eyes had time to adjust to the darkness inside the club, Jimbo, the same one from last night, walked up, grabbed Debbie's hand, and pulled her behind the bar, casually telling me to follow them. We walked through the heavy wooden door and found ourselves in a normally lit, rather dingy office full of file cabinets, where Ted sat at a huge gray metal desk. "Ah, here you are, my dear," Ted greeted my wife, completely ignoring me. "And so smartly dressed, I see." It's true, and a little against my will, Debbie dressed up for the meeting. Now, when I say dressed up, I mean she put on her best, going out clothes, although they were hardly sexy or even very fashionable. "Now sit on my lap, young lady," he ordered her, and with a scared look at me, she nervously walked over to him and sat on his lap. Jimbo positioned himself between us so that even if I had the courage, I could not interfere. "This decision I have concerns you, young lady," he began, confirming my worst fears. Usually, when I interview new female candidates for jobs here, I ask them to take off their clothes, but since I've already seen and felt the product, I think we can skip that for now. "Wait a minute," I started to object, but to my surprise, Debbie interrupted me. "Let's hear what he has to say, George," she suggested. "Very reasonable, young lady," Ted chuckled. "I'm glad to hear you're not going to make any trouble." "So what job am I interviewing for?" she demanded more confidently than I expected. "If you think that I will be one of these dancers, then you are very mistaken." "We don't call it that anymore," Ted replied with a smile. "Besides, an innocent girl like you will need quite a lot of training before we let you do this." "So what do you expect from me?" Debbie asked. "First, as a waitress," he answered, wrapping his huge arm around her slender waist. "Then maybe we'll try you at the bar." "Well," Debbie began nervously, "I've never been a waitress, but I can probably handle it." "Now listen, I don't." I began, but my objections were interrupted by a poke in the ribs from Jimbo, who almost knocked me to the floor. "How long will I have to work to pay off the debt?" Debbie asked Ted, giving me a sympathetic look. "Oh, we'll see how it goes, honey," he replied. "How many nights a week can you work?" "Maybe 2, she suggested hesitantly. "Let's call it 4, he countered. "You start at 9 every evening until closing." "What time will it be?" Debbie asked, but Ted just shrugged indifferently. "Well, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll pay off your debt," was the closest I got to an answer to how long she'd have to work, and the conversation that followed made me feel sick. "There's one girl missing tonight, Debbie dear, so you better change and come out," he said, holding out several small items of silky fabric. "But everyone will see my bra in this top," Debbie complained, looking at the tiny piece of material. "No, they won't," he grinned. "Yes, they will," she insisted, lifting him towards her. "Look, there's almost nothing here. It's open right in the front, and it's a little see-through anyway." I swallowed, happily remembering that she'd worn a decent bra tonight that wouldn't show too much. "They won't see your bra, honey," Ted assured her again. "But they will," Debbie protested. "Look, there's nothing here." "They won't see your bra because it's not meant to be worn," Ted happily told my wife. "None of our girls wear a bra here, so it's something you don't have to worry about." "But then they will see my—" She fell silent and apparently swallowed, realizing the consequences. "Only when you bend over," Ted continued. "You'll get a lot more tips this way, so you might want to practice how to properly give glimpses to customers." "Just a glimpse," Debbie exclaimed in shock. "Are you saying that I should show my breasts to clients?" "Of course, honey," he laughed. "It's a fucking nightclub. Once you get used to it, you can let some of them touch it if you want, and then you'll actually get a lot of tips." Debbie stood there silently, her mouth open, trying to process what she had just been told, while Ted continued to make surprises. "Are you wearing those old-fashioned panties again?" Debbie simply nodded. "Well, you'll have to buy new ones, things and stuff, because the customers won't like them." Debbie lifted her tiny miniskirt, and we could both see why her panties would be visible. "Tonight will do," Ted continued indifferently, ignoring our horrified looks. "Unless, of course, you want to go without them, like some girls do." "Without?" Debbie whispered. "You mean no panties in such a short skirt?" "Perhaps not," he said thoughtfully. "Thank God for that," Debbie exclaimed with relief. "No, better shave before you go without panties. Maybe another time, when you get used to guys groping you." You should try it because the tips will be much better. Damn it. Before I could gather my thoughts, Jimbo began leading me out of the room, leaving my poor, embarrassed wife standing there. Change your clothes, honey, you have clients. I tried to resist Jimbo, fully aware that Debbie had already begun to undo the buttons on her blouse. As he easily pushed me through the door, my last glimpse of Debbie was of her removing her blouse from her shoulders and exposing her small white bra. What time should I pick her up? I asked Jimbo in desperation. No need, buddy, he replied, pushing me out of the club. We'll make sure she gets home safe. But what time? I demanded, mentally imagining my poor Debbie stripping back down in that office. Who knows, he answered. Depends on how well she does and whether clients want to talk to her after or whatever. Damn it, can you imagine? I walked slowly towards my little Volkswagen in a daze, never expecting to walk home alone, furiously leaving my dear wife alone in this place. The drive home was a nightmare, and I stopped a couple of times when I felt like I was about to burst into tears or something. I thought about going out and buying a gun or something, but in the UK, it's almost impossible for a regular guy like me. It only got worse when I got home, and neither the TV nor my magazines could hold my attention for more than a few minutes, and I ended up sprawled on the sofa complaining about my lot and worrying about how my poor Debbie was coping. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., and Debbie had already been out of the house longer than she had been in years. I think I dozed off at some point, but I was brought back to reality by the roar of a powerful car approaching the house. Instantly, I found myself at the window, stunned by the sight of a gleaming Aston Martin DB9 parked outside. The car is worth at least £100,000, and this bastard put us through this ordeal for the sake of an old Porsche. Why the hell did he even buy it? My heart was racing as I stood there looking at the car, unable to see what was going on inside, afraid to let my imagination run wild. After some time, but probably not, the passenger side door opened and a pair of long, naked legs poked out. A lovely pair of bare legs that were familiar to me, with a pair of high heels that were not. Debbie closed the door and leaned back toward the window for a moment. Long enough for a kiss, but maybe not. Her tiny skirt that she wore home rode up over her bottom, revealing her white cotton panties. Well, at least she left them, apparently. She teetered on the driveway in unfamiliar heels, turning to wave at the powerful car as it drove away, hiking up her small skirt as it rode further up her thighs. By the time she reached the front door, I was already there, and Debbie jumped back in surprise when I opened it. "You're still awake," she said hoarsely. "Of course," I confirmed, looking at her partially exposed breasts in disbelief. "How was it? Are you okay, honey?" "I'm fine, but I'm very tired, George," Debbie replied, her eyes clearly closing with exhaustion. "I need a shower and then sleep." "But what happened, honey?" I pleaded with her, desperate to know what she was going through, praying that she wouldn't have to endure too much unwanted attention from clients. "Just wanted to know, damn it, tomorrow, dear," she said, hugging me for a moment. "I really don't want to talk about it tonight, and I must smell like a brewery with all the alcohol spilled on me." With these words, she slipped away from my arms that held her, and left me standing and watching her wearily climb the stairs. "But please, Debbie," I shouted after her, following her to the bottom of the stairs, not knowing whether to enjoy or be disgusted by her white panties as the skirt rode even higher up her thighs with every step. "It's okay, darling, but not now, darling, tomorrow," were her last words as she disappeared from sight, leaving me standing there, disappointed, harmonious, and unhappy. Of course, she came to bed, but she was in the shower for a long time. She asked me to hold her, and within minutes she was fast asleep, which is more than I could say for myself. I lay there for most of the rest of the night, wondering what the future held. I wondered what kind of humiliation Debbie had to endure and tormented myself with thoughts of what she might have to do in the coming weeks. I was angry at myself because I couldn't seem to do anything about it. The next morning came too early, and we both started getting ready and headed off to our respective schools, me avoiding the questions that needed to be asked and Debbie avoiding my gaze. The day seemed endless, and it was no surprise that I didn't perform at my best. Then I went home. "We need to talk," Debbie greeted me. "I couldn't handle it last night, but we really need to talk." Of course, I immediately agreed, and after we had both made ourselves a cup of tea, we sat down together to begin our conversation. "Do you love me, George?" Debbie began. "I mean, do you really love me?" "Of course, honey," I assured her, wanting to hug her and make all her problems disappear. "Well, last night, George, I did things you wouldn't like," she continued, making my stomach clench painfully. "I did things I would never have imagined and let men touch me a little. I let them touch me where a wife probably shouldn't let other men touch her." "What?" I exclaimed, jumping to my feet. "Which things? Where did they touch you?" "My stomach, my arms, and several times." "Well, in other places," she whispered guiltily. "One guy put his hand under my skirt when I had a tray in my hands, and I couldn't get away so easily." "God, Debbie," I screamed in rage. "You shouldn't go back there. We'll go to the police and tell them what's going on, like we should have done from the beginning." "We can't, honey," my wife told me with a tear in her eye. "They have pictures of me in the club with my breasts bulging out of this stupid little t-shirt, and even one with some man who I barely remember pinching one of them. They are threatening to send them to my principal at school if we cause problems, and I will lose my job and never find another one." "But damn it, Debbie." I started to protest, but Debbie raised her hand to stop me. "That's not all, George," she continued. "Ted said if you caused trouble, he would break both your arms or worse." "What do we do?" I asked plaintively. "We just have to get through it, honey," she said. "With the tips I earn, it shouldn't take more than 3 months to pay off." "But I can't expect you to put up with this for 3 months, Debbie," I tried to reason with her. "No husband should expect his wife to be treated this way." "Everything will be fine, George," my wife continued, rising to place her hand on my arm. "I'll be fine, I promise you." "No," I said, "I just can't let you suffer like that." "This is the worst thing, George," Debbie said then, looking at me almost despairingly. "What exactly?" "Promise you won't hate me, George," she demanded. "I could never hate you, Debbie," I said. "What could be worse than the fact that they made you suffer?" "You are sure?" she asked nervously. "Of course I'm sure," I replied and waited for what she would say. "I liked it," she whispered quietly. "What?" "I liked it," she repeated. "The first half hour was really terrible, but once I got used to it, it wasn't so bad. Then one of the men there said that he thought I was the most beautiful girl in the place and asked if he could look at my naked breasts rather than just catch a glimpse of them." "Bastard," I muttered, not believing what my previously innocent wife was telling me. "He said he was tired of all these big breasts and that he thought my natural small breasts were beautiful." I took a deep breath to calm myself. What he said was true, I thought, but I couldn't bear the thought of my wife having to put up with such rude comments. "I did it, darling," she continued, almost crying. "Sorry, but I did it. I pulled my top aside and stood there exposing my bare breasts for his inspection. And his friends, by the way. Sorry, but I just stood there, sticking them out for everyone to see." "I can hardly believe what you're saying, Debbie," I tried to say, although I couldn't help but notice the impact her words were having on me. It upset me, there was no doubt about it, but as before, my arousal was beginning to make me uncomfortable. "Damn it. What kind of husband is it that makes me like this?" "George," Debbie spoke again, "you take it very well, dear. Much better than I expected." "Well, it's... oh, I just don't know what to say, Debbie," and it was true. I was completely at a loss for words to describe my outrage, but I couldn't pretend that other, very strange feelings weren't surfacing. "There's something else you'd better know, darling. It's better to tell everything right away, since I've already started." "What else?" I had no idea. "That evening," she began to explain, "when Ted told me to take off my top, I couldn't believe I actually did it. But by the time I was left in just my knickers, I was desperate to get all of my clothes off. I felt so hot and horny, George. I just wanted to take off the rest of my clothes and was afraid that they wouldn't force me to strip completely. When he started touching my breasts and everything else, I just lost control. And when all three of them touched me in the hall, I was in seventh heaven. This is all. I think my voice was shaking. Pretty much, Debbie finally admitted. I love you, honey, and I don't want to hurt you, but I can't lie. You are too important to me to lie. Damn it. What should we do now? Do you think this is enough for any man? Do you think it's over for the night? I have to go shopping tomorrow right after school, she announced a little later after we had somehow cooked and eaten dinner. I'll be back a little later. Okay, I said. What more could I say? I'm going clothes shopping, Debbie continued, looking at me. Okay, I repeated. I wasn't being mean, I was just unsettled. I'm going with Tammy, she continued carefully, waiting for my reaction, to which I asked who Tammy was. The girl from the club, she replied, continuing to keep her remarks as short as possible. Are you going clothes shopping with a girl from that damn club? I finally responded. What clothes? You know, George, Debbie said in a barely audible whisper. High heels, nice little thongs, things like that. How the hell can we afford this? I almost exploded. She risked pushing me too far. For the tip from last night. And that's enough? More than enough, she smiled at me more confidently. I made more tips last night than I made as a teacher in a week. What could I say? Put her out of the house. Leave her. Divorce her. Beat her. No, of course I couldn't do any of those things, and I didn't want to. What mattered was that she was completely honest with me and still loved me. What could I do? I really had no idea, not the slightest. Well, she went and did her shopping and didn't come back until too late. She didn't choose to show me what she bought, and I was too cowardly to ask her. We just carried on with our lives, and other than Debbie being away from home a few nights a week, nothing much had changed. Then came Monday, the 11th. I remember this date for some small reason. Honey, Debbie told me, cuddling on the sofa while we watched Coronation Street on TV. I hated the show, but she always loved it, and me agreeing to watch it with her was a sign of my love. Ted asked me for something, but I told him I had to ask you first. Did he accept it? I was surprised, not remembering Ted as a person who asks, not demands. Yes, in a way, Debbie replied. He's really cute once you get to know him. I decided to ignore this comment. He wants me to become a dancer. Then she hit me. I trained at the club, and he thinks I'm good enough. A dancer? I asked again. Yes, a dancer, she confirmed, smiling at me as if she had just announced that she had received a promotion at work. Probably not in big clothes, I suggested, remembering the photo outside the club. Not much, she blurted out. At least I'll be without clothes. A vulgar dancer, I clarified. My wife is a dancer. They don't talk like that anymore, honey, she reassured me. Exotic dancer, pole dancer, lap dancer, whatever. But you still take off your clothes. Yes, all of it, she confirmed. Can I come and have a look? I surprised her, and myself at the same time. I'd rather you didn't come, dear, she replied in surprise. Ted doesn't really like it when entertainers' husbands visit the club. At this moment, I almost lost my mind. My wife has to ask her boss if I can watch her undress, and he will probably deny me permission. Damn it. Damn them all. Damn this damn car. The next few weeks became increasingly unbearable as Debbie worked as a teacher every day and at the club 4 nights a week. It seemed like we barely saw each other. When she wasn't working, she was catching up on lost sleep. Our sex life has practically disappeared. This can't go on, Debbie, I announced one night as we lay in bed and Debbie came home completely exhausted. We are no longer married. You're killing yourself. You're right, she replied, to my surprise. I've been thinking about it, and I'm going to leave at the end of this week, and we can be like before. Thank God for that, I said joyfully. Whatever the problems, we will solve them, dear. I hugged her and pulled her towards me, intending to make love to my wife, although this was the first time in 2 or 3 weeks. She fell asleep. Well, there will be another time, I told myself. Of course, asking her to quit her job at the club and the reality of it were two different things. I didn't know how much of our debt had been paid off, or what the consequences would be if we couldn't pay off the rest, which we were yet to find out. But we will get through this, and we will get through this together. That's it, she announced at the end of the week. I quit. I have handed in my resignation, and we will have more time for each other. What did they say? I asked with some concern. They were very unhappy, Debbie told me, her face scrunching up slightly. But they accepted it, and that's the end of it. No consequences, Debbie? I asked, my heart beating faster. Is this really the end? Absolutely, George, dear, confirmed my beloved wife. This is all. It's over. End. God bless. I thought we would never get through this, and I owed so much to my wife for going through what she did. I didn't know how to thank her, but I promised myself that I would find a way. The weekend passed, and we spent a lot of time together, although she was so tired that we only managed a couple of short sessions. Nothing special, but a new beginning for the two of us, away from the clutches of these criminals, and just the two of us. On Monday morning, I had to leave early for a music lesson as usual, and I left Debbie eating breakfast as usual. See you tonight, darling, I whispered to her, and she responded with a stunningly sweet smile. Everything should be fine again. It seemed that our problems were over. I should explain that on Mondays I started early, but I was allowed to miss the last lesson, and I rushed home, determined to do everything perfectly by Debbie's arrival. I wanted this evening to be special. I wanted this to be the first night of the rest of our lives. Hi, honey, Debbie greeted me as I walked through the door. Hi, Debbie, I replied, surprised. What are you doing at home? I'm making you a special dinner, honey, Debbie smiled. Now I can do this all the time. But I don't understand, I muttered, confused. Why aren't you at work at school? At school? She laughed. Why do I have to be at school? Because you are a teacher, I replied, surprised by her answer. No more, George, she smiled at me. I told you that I did as you asked and submitted my resignation. I'm not a teacher anymore. What? But I thought you quit your job at the club, I said in amazement. Why would I do this? Debbie asked, a confused look on her face. I can make almost as much in one good night at a club as I can in a month as a teacher. But you have to. You. I muttered, unable to express my thoughts. I have to show my breasts and everything you mean, Debbie finished for me. So what? It's not a big deal, and to be honest, I actually enjoy it most of the time. But all these years of study and training, I continued to mumble, her use of the word breasts, for the first time not escaping me. It's all in vain. It's all in vain. Not really, darling, she smiled indulgently. My main number is usually in the form of a teacher, although this outfit doesn't stay on me for long. It's not exactly the same, I noted. Go ahead, honey, she continued, ignoring my comment. Go and eat your dinner because I need to be at the club by 8 o'clock in the evening. A group of estimators are arriving early from some conference and need to be entertained. Entertaining? I hissed, unable to find words. Yes, honey, Debbie smiled at me. They say they are very excited people, so I could use a tip. Soviet? Yes, chips, dear, she replied. Steak and chips, your favorite. Now eat, sweetie, and enjoy. Oh shit, what the hell happened to my marriage? Damn, at least the chips were good. Life went on, and I saw my wife more often, although she was no longer the same as before. Her dressing style had changed so radically that some of our old friends started avoiding us. There weren't that many guys around, though, and our house was becoming more and more popular as they stopped by in hopes of catching Debbie in the sexier, more revealing clothes she seemed to prefer. The sex was better, though. But that's not all you know. Debbie became rather evasive about what she actually did at the club, and no matter how much I asked, she didn't want to talk about it. Only that everything is still in order, and that the money for the Porsche is gradually paying off. Finally, one night, I couldn't take it anymore and found myself outside the club wondering if I had the nerve to go in. The same scruffy, skinny guy took my money without showing any acknowledgement, and I found myself back inside the place. I have to admit that in the evening, when there were a lot of people there, the place looked much better than last time, and I was surprised at how many female visitors there were among the groups of men. Then, of course, there were the waitresses, all quite stunning and wearing tiny little outfits almost as small as the one I saw Debbie in. Several of them approached me and asked if I wanted some company, and shock came over me when I realized that my Debbie must have been doing the same. Eventually, I discovered that if I joined a group of men standing in the back, we were served at the bar next to us, and the waitresses, or hostesses as they actually were, stopped offering to us. From there, I had a clear view of both stages, almost more than the podiums on which the girls performed. Now I'm a normal man, and I must admit that I liked what I saw as a succession of beautiful women took off all their clothes and exposed themselves completely openly to the men crowded around each stage. There was one little blonde I particularly liked, and for a few moments I almost forgot why I was there. But I still saw no sign of my Debbie. A good hour had passed when I saw Ted and Jimbo rushing through the club, and although I hardly recognized her at first, Debbie was with them. I was deceived by what she was wearing. No, she was not wearing a miniskirt and a revealing top, but quite the opposite. She wore a practical skirt and a white blouse that covered almost everything. What the hell is going on? Ted and his buddies joined another group of men sitting in an open booth of sorts, and Debbie, to my surprise, reached over and gave Ted a peck on the cheek before walking off stage. Pretty little thing, isn't it? She said that the guy was standing next to me and nudging me, no doubt noticing my interest in her. Very beautiful, I answered briefly, not really wanting to engage in conversation. She's new, my new friend continued. I've only been naked for a few weeks, but she has a lovely little body. I dare say yes, I replied out of politeness. You will see yourself soon, he continued. I think she'll be next. Oh God, reality is about to hit me. And indeed, the previous girl collected tips from the guys on stage and disappeared backstage. The comparison started, he made a couple of lewd jokes, and then announced the girl you've all been waiting for. Even the guys around me seemed to become a little more attentive, and there was actually a wave of applause as the comparison gave way to Miss Jones, as he described her. Then I understood. Miss Jones, that is, Debbie, came on stage in an outfit that I then recognized as a school teacher, strict and decent. She walked across the stage, looking at the men standing there over her obviously fake glasses, and seemed to be marking names on a notepad she held in her hands, as if she were picking up a class magazine. Right, she announced after a while, and the whole club seemed to fall silent. It looks like you boys are all here, so we'll start the lesson. I noticed that she attracted everyone's attention to a level that would have been a credit to any real class. Okay, boys, Debbie continued. What is the square root of 12,647? Accurate to 3 decimal places, please. When no one answered, she simply shook her head and tried to solve another nearly impossible math question. Okay, boys, she announced, frowning at everyone. It's really not good enough. I'll try another question, and if the boy I choose answers correctly, then he gets to choose which item of clothing I take off. Debbie continued to frown, although by then everyone else was smiling happily. That's right, boy, she shouted, pointing at a 40-year-old guy with a group of his friends. What is 2 plus 2? 4, exclaimed the satisfied player. Please take off your blouse, miss. Pulling away, Debbie slowly unbuttoned her blouse and threw it away, revealing one of her old prim and proper white bras. I hadn't seen any of them for a while and wondered where they had gone. You are a boy in a green shirt, she repeated. Where's your school cap? Left him at home, miss, the unfortunate guy shouted back with a laugh, who was then denied the opportunity because he was inappropriately dressed. The bald boy is in the back, my wife continued. What is 5 times 2? 10, Miss Jones, he growled back. Take off your skirt. Say please, naughty boy, Debbie retorted, looking feignedly angry. Don't be so impudent in class. Sorry, miss, he returned immediately. Please, could you take off your skirt next time? Of course, boy, she smiled at him, seductively unbuttoned her modest skirt, which I also suddenly recognized earlier, lowered it down her slender legs, and threw it to the side. By this time, I was already somewhat confused, not knowing whether to get angry or just sit back and enjoy it. My Debbie was more than just a dancer, she was an artist, and she clearly loved what she did. The best dancer in this place, my friend told me. Wait until you see her cute little breasts. They're fucking great. I told you so, he continued as the other student somehow managed to count 3 minus 1, and Debbie added her bra to the small pile of clothes behind her, her bare breasts on full display. Okay, boys, now focus, Debbie commanded to the admiring class of boys gathered around the stage. Whoever answers the next question correctly gets to come over here and help me take this off. The elastic of her thong snaps. They all seem to lean forward to better hear the question. Square root of 36 times the square of 5, Debbie asked loudly. 150, I muttered to the guy next to me, amused as he tried to count on his fingers. Nonsense, he said. This is 150, miss, some smart-looking guy shouted over the crowd after a minute or so. That's right, boy, Debbie smiled at him happily. Now come up here and get your reward. This confident guy jumped onto the stage. The security guards immediately tensed up so that no one would follow him, and Debbie, that sassy girl, took his hand and led him to the center of the stage, rubbing herself seductively against him. Until this moment, to be honest, I was a little carried away by what was happening. I was captivated by Debbie's great performance and enjoyed the sight of the beautiful young woman taking off her clothes just like all the other guys. To be honest, the fact that it was my wife made it even more intense. But when she said that some guy would help her take off her panties, it suddenly hit me. Suddenly, I didn't want to be there anymore. Damn it, my neighbor commented loudly. Can you imagine being there, taking this beauty's panties off? Can you imagine? Yes, I can, I muttered, feeling my heart clench, remembering how many times I've done this since we met. Not that anyone was paying attention, too busy watching the lucky guy on stage slide his fingers inside her tiny panties and slowly pull them down her legs. Damn it, naughty boy, my wife reproached him. Do that again, and I'll have to give you the cane. Despite his attempts to prolong the meeting, the bouncers came and gently but firmly removed his hands from my wife's naked body and sent him back to his seat. Debbie didn't give him a second glance. However, this did not stop me from feeling bad. I've seen enough. All I wanted to do was get out of there. In theory, I knew what she was doing, but the reality was too hard for me. The worst part was that Debbie was so clearly enjoying it. What happened to my sweet little wife? I never admitted that I came to see her perform, and other than her less modest attire, there was little to indicate that she was anything other than my beloved wife. However, things came to a head when I was teaching a group of older children in the afternoon and was having great difficulty keeping their attention. They were more young adults than children, and I always had a good relationship with this class. But that day, they just didn't listen to me and were all giggling at something they were passing on to each other. What is this? I shouted, snatching the paper from one of them as he passed it across the aisle. Do you recognize her, sir? One of the guys, Nick Jones, asked me. We all thought she looked familiar. My heart sank when I looked at what turned out to be a computer printout and was horrified to discover that it showed my wife sprawled naked on the hood of a car. From the moment I saw it, I had no doubt. I don't know why, but I immediately understood. This is your missus, isn't it, sir? Asked another boy. We found it on the internet. Of course it's not her, I muttered. Looks like her, but it's her, sir, Jones insisted. Look, this is the Porsche you had. What? Yes, look, sir, continued one of the others. This is your old Porsche. We recognized it by its license plate with the letters GAD. Why is your wife not wearing clothes, sir? I couldn't answer. Is your wife selling her body, sir? Asked David, one of the Shire boys. She is very beautiful and has great breasts, sir. If you don't mind, sir. Why is Mr. Adams' wife posing naked? That's enough, guys, I said, trying to regain control. Mr. Adams' wife looks like she's one of them. How much does she charge, sir? Asked the boy from the back desk. More than I would take. Angie Thomas chimed in before I could answer. The girls in the class had been silent up to that point. I'd do it with Mr. Adams for free. You would do this to anyone in pants for free, Jones shouted. I wouldn't do it with you, idiot, she responded, standing up and puffing out her chest. But if Mr. Adams wanted, I would take off my clothes and give you all a show, just like his wife. Get control of yourself, Angie, I yelled at her, acutely aware of how she had been flirting with me all year, and shocked by my reaction to the idea that she would actually carry out the threat. Well, she has bigger breasts than your wife, sir, chimed in another girl, Natalie, but the body is good. Shut up, everyone, I shouted, losing my cool in front of the class for the first time in my entire career, knowing that they had lost all respect for me. Is this really your wife, sir? Amy, the shyest girl in the class, asked quietly in the silence that followed my outburst. Why did she do that, sir? Why does she post naked photos of herself on the internet? I don't know, damn, I don't know, I shouted, and leaving the classroom, did not stop until I reached the refuge of the staff room, where I sat almost in tears until the end of the lesson. And that is not all. Hey, Jim, Tony, the geography teacher, called as he entered the staff room, not knowing that I was sitting in the far corner out of sight. Have you seen those pictures of George's wife going around the school? I saw them, answered Jim, the gym teacher. I've been confiscating them half the damn morning. Can I have one? Tony replied hopefully. Me too, if you have any extra, added the new chemistry assistant. I don't even know this girl, but from what I've seen, she's amazing. Nice breasts, Tony agreed. I would never have expected that from her. I've met her a few times, and she always seemed pretty conservative. Not anymore, Jim laughed. Rumor has it that she's a dancer at some club nearby. Maybe we can all go out one night and watch, Tony joked. Let's ask George if he can get us tickets, the new chemist chuckled. I don't know if he even knows what his wife does, was the last comment I heard as the three left the room, laughing at my grief. My stomach churned, damn them. As a result, the vice principal found me curled up in a chair in the staff room when I was supposed to teach the next lesson. Better take the rest of the day off, George, he told me. These pictures are everywhere and everyone will pester you. I actually asked for the whole week off, and I think they were more than happy to get rid of me. So, home, I was stunned to see a Porsche, of all cars, parked in front of our house when I returned. Everything got out of control. With a heavy heart, I took out the key and entered the house. My mouth dropped open in shock when the first thing I noticed when I walked into the living room was that Bruiser Ted, the bastard, lounging on our couch like he owned the house. He looked at me and grinned. Long time no see, George, he chuckled, leaving me speechless. What did you say, dear? Debbie asked, walking into the room from the kitchen, completely unaware that I was standing behind her. Nothing that matters, beautiful, Ted replied, reaching out to her and pulling her onto his lap, his huge paw completely encircling her left breast. Her action was bad enough. It wasn't that she was wearing those ridiculously high heels. It was that was all she was wearing. Completely naked. We have to go, Debbie, Ted said as he pulled away from the passionate kiss she gave him. We have a long way to go. Oh, Ted, my wife replied, clinging to him. We have time to have a little fun, don't we? I'm not sure your husband George will like this, Debbie, he told her, winking at me over her bare shoulder. What if he does not know he won't hurt him, honey, Debbie whispered to him. Maybe, Debbie, the creep continued, but since he's standing behind you, it might be difficult. What? She cried, looking at him, but he just grinned and nodded in confirmation, then turned to me and greeted again. Hello, George. Debbie's body instantly froze until she slowly turned her head to look at me. "Oh God, no," she cried, her face filled with despair. "George, I wouldn't. Oh God, no." "Come. Come on, girl, put something on." Ted broke the silence. "We need to go to the ferry." "But Ted," Debbie began to protest, but he sent her to the bedroom with a loud slap on her bare bottom. "Don't do anything stupid, George," Ted muttered, standing up and towering over me. "So, I had your wife, but that's no reason to be upset. I'm the only one who gets it." "Should I be happy about this?" I spat. "Why not?" he answered calmly. "Most of the girls in the club would do anything with guys in trousers and money in their pockets." My mouth opened, but no words came out. Should I be grateful that he was the only one who had it? At this point, Debbie returned to the room, still pulling her crop top over her bare chest. "Please don't be angry, George," she said to me, trying to hug me, but I retreated. "All this is for you, dear." She was still looking at me when Ted led her out the door. "We're going to the south of France for a few days, honey," she shouted to me. "I'll be back in a few days and everything will be fine. We can go back to the way things were before." "No," Ted laughed, dragging her towards the Porsche and looking at me with contempt. The next day it was worse than a bad dream, equal to any nightmare I could remember. I didn't hear anything from Debbie, and her cell phone didn't even give me the option to leave a message. Not that I'm sure I want to do it. After 2 days of obscurity, I gathered my courage and called the club where she worked, but, judging by the answers, everything there was in turmoil. The next evening I went there, not knowing what to do. One moment I was thinking about divorce, and the next I was close to tears, worrying about where she was, worrying if she was okay. The club was closed when I arrived, which surprised me, so I waited in the car. Over the next hour, several cars arrived, stayed for a while, and left. By 10 o'clock, it was clear that the club would not be opening that night, and for some reason this upset me and made me feel even more disconnected from Debbie. What should I do? I drove home slowly, stopped in front of the house, and walked wearily along the path. "Mr. Adams?" The deep voice startled me. "Mr. George Adams." My heart sank, remembering what happened the last time and fearing what would happen next. "Is your wife Mrs. Debbie Adams?" continued the large man in the suit after I confirmed my identity. "Yes," I answered automatically. "Where is she? What happened?" "That's what we'd like to know," the voice continued. "Would you like to continue the conversation inside, or will you come with us to the station?" For the first time, I looked at the large man who was holding my hand, and for the first time, I noticed the uniformed officer standing next to him. Oh shit, now what? I chose my living room, not wanting to go to the station. I already had enough problems at school that I wouldn't have to explain this if anyone saw the police taking me away. Not so. These were not local policemen at all. "Do you know where your wife is now, sir?" they asked me, and I speak politely when I say asked. "Do you have any idea where she might be?" They asked more insistently when I said I didn't know. "Do you know when she should be back?" he continued when I mentioned the south of France, which didn't seem to surprise him. "She said for a couple of days," I muttered, feeling out of place, not knowing where my own wife was. The man looked at me almost angrily for a few moments, then turned to his colleague. "Take him away, Norman," he ordered the uniformed officer. "I don't think Mr. Adams is telling us everything he knows." Despite my protests, they pulled me out of the house and put me in a patrol car and drove away. But not to the local police station, as I expected, but much further, where they put me in a cell to await my fate. The interrogation continued for 2 hours until I finally convinced them that I knew nothing more, and even then they refused to take me home, and I had to get there myself. The only thing I've learned is that my Debbie is involved in some serious stuff. Drugs, serious stuff, but I didn't know anything else. When the call came, I didn't expect it. "George, it's you?" "Yes, Debbie," I replied, immediately recognizing her voice. "Where the hell are you? What's happening?" "There's no time, darling," she sobbed, almost breaking my heart despite everything she'd done to me. Listen, you have to do something. Take the Porsche and put it in the garage, she ordered me, refusing to explain anything other than where it was on the other side of London and where she had hidden the spare key. I'll contact you as soon as I can. But where are you? I insisted, refusing to comply with her request without explanation. Jimbo and I are visiting his friend in Tottenham, was all she said, bursting into tears when I asked her for some reason where Ted was. And she disappeared. The next day, I took the train into London, took the tube to the suburbs, and picked up the Porsche, which was indeed where she said it would be. I brought it home, but couldn't put it in the garage as it was full of stuff, so I left the car outside as usual. I see the Porsche is back, Mr. Adams. D. Jenkins from the Controlled Substances Unit greeted me when I opened the door early the next morning. I have a search warrant for the house, so we'll look at the car while we're here. In fact, they didn't search the house very thoroughly. They didn't seem very interested, almost as if they knew they wouldn't find anything. They let their dog roam the house, but it showed no more interest than they did. Check the car, Jenkins told the dog's handler, but this did not cause any reaction from the dog, and with a shrug, the handler packed up and left. Have you heard anything from your wife? Dee asked, a little friendlier this time than last time. I just looked at him, not knowing what to say. The car didn't come here on its own, he noted patiently. I think at that moment something inside me broke. Perhaps this should have happened much earlier, but, well, it didn't. Still, what the hell was Debbie doing? How involved was she? Why the hell did I have to take the blame for what she and did these bandits do? God, she slept with one of them behind my back. I told him everything, ending with information about Jimbo's friend in Tottenham, after which Jenkins smiled widely. Caught the bastard, he exclaimed, and, thanking him, rushed to the waiting police car and drove away with the squeal of tires. I almost missed breaking news on TV. You know, those stickers that go at the bottom of the screen and ruin your concentration. I only caught the end and had to wait a full 10 minutes to see it again. Major shooting operation in North London, 3 killed. My heart sank. Debbie, my Debbie. Was she shot? She is dead. I no longer knew whether I loved her or hated her, but I didn't want her to die. I searched half the night, desperately trying to find more information, checking news programs, the internet, and I don't know how many useless phone calls, but to no avail. All I could find out was that the police raided a house in Tottenham, North London, and there was a shootout in which 3 men were shot and 2 policemen were wounded. 3 men. Yes, men. By no stretch of the imagination could my Debbie be mistaken for a man, could she? Isn't it? The press always confuses everything. But they couldn't have made that mistake, could they? Crap, and did I even care? Of course, as expected from the British press, they were wrong, but not in Debbie's case. In fact, only 2 were killed, although a 3rd was wounded, but my Debbie was arrested and charged. It turned out that they were involved in smuggling from North Africa through Spain to France, and then to the UK. I didn't shed a tear when I found out that Ted, bless him, was no longer with us and went to meet my maker. Some other guy, a French guy I'd never heard of, met his end too, and Mike, remember Mike, was severely injured and would eventually lose his leg. Jimbo was arrested at the same time as Debbie, and the 2 of them, along with 4 or 5 others, were put on trial. And I passed them. Was it bothering me? Well, now that half of them are dead or crippled and the rest are in prison, no. I'm so sorry, George, Debbie sobbed when I came to see her for the first time. I did such terrible things. We talked about how we would be able to afford a good lawyer to defend her, although rumors were that the case was a foregone conclusion. The problem was that I hated her, but I couldn't stop loving her. It wasn't easy. Don't sell the Porsche, George, she insisted, but when I asked why, she simply looked around, apparently wondering who might be listening. On the second visit, we were allowed to talk more privately. I think you were wondering why Ted bought our Porsche, honey, she said, and of course I was. The gang bought powerful cars that didn't attract too much attention in order to smuggle drugs. They would cut holes in the wings or whatever, hide them, and then weld the wings shut so no one would notice. Are you saying they did this to our Porsche? I asked in amazement. Is there a secret compartment there? I think yes. But they searched for him with the dog Debbie, I said. Nothing was found. Our Porsche wasn't used for this, George, Debbie whispered. Get yourself an angle grinder and see what you find. Do you know what's there? I asked. I'm not sure, she whispered, but it's worth checking. I immediately returned home and cleared out half the junk in the garage to make room for the damn Porsche. After putting it there, I left the car, half terrified of what I might find if I started exploring. A few months later, the trial began and Debbie was sentenced to 12 years, but this meant that with good behavior, she could get out in 8 or 9 years. Jimbo was unlucky and received a 20 with additional charges. He won't be released for a long time. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I went to a hardware store, bought an angle grinder, and got to work. 4 hours and several cuts and bruises later, the car's fenders were a mess. But I found it. I found a hiding place. My hand shook as I pulled out a rather large leather package and dropped it on the floor, afraid that it might explode. Plucking up courage, I took a knife and cut the package, not knowing what to expect inside, and not knowing what to do if it turned out to be illegal drugs. What I didn't expect to find was euros. Not pounds or dollars, but euros. A hell of a lot of them, all in neat packs. Naturally, I started counting them, but after 10 minutes I lost track. Only then did I realize that each pack contained 20 bills, and they were all 50 or 100 euros, so it was easy to count. Half an hour later, I had the result. 400,000 euros. Okay, maybe I was off by a couple thousand, but who cared? 400,000 damn euros. Damn it, time to make decisions. It didn't take me long to decide not to declare the money. Apparently, they had been obtained illegally, but not by me, and the only person alive and smart enough to know was Debbie, and even she didn't seem to be sure. I later found out that Ted's gang went to France with money hidden in one car and exchanged it for another, identical one, in which the drugs were hidden. They just changed the numbers, and no one would suspect anything. Apparently, that's why they decided to use our Porsche to match the identical car of the French criminals. Perhaps my tip to the police that they were heading to the south of France ruined the exchange. I didn't know for sure, but I hoped that somehow I was responsible. So, was I going to tell her? Was I going to tell anyone? How the hell do I convert euros into pounds? Well, I told her on the next visit, but stated that it was only 20,000 euros and that I would save it to help her when she got out. She looked surprised that the amount was so small, but if Debbie suspected me of lying, she never mentioned it. She had enough problems of her own. The next step was to get rid of the car. How to get rid of a car with cut-out fenders? Not easy. In the end, I patched it up as best I could and took it to the Porsche dealer we had gone to before, telling him some story about how the car had been damaged by vandals. I don't know if he believed me, but the first thing he did was open the hood. By the way, for those who don't know, Porsche has it in the back. She got a new transmission, I told him. It has a new engine and gearbox. He surprised me. Anyway, we agreed, and I left with a check for £9,000, which was much more than I expected, considering the mess I made. As you can imagine, I was excited to see the back of the damn car. I made a very conscious decision not to change my lifestyle so as not to attract attention to myself, although I did buy myself a few new things at Marks and Spencer's, which accepts euros. I listed our house for sale at a very reasonable price. It was attractive to first-time buyers, and the market had grown since Debbie and I bought it, so 4 months later I walked out of the lawyer's office with another check for 42,000. Not bad, huh? Not only did I have money, but I also had a reason to spend some of it. The betrayed husband makes the most of what he has left from a broken marriage. A trip to the casino in France more or less solved all my euro legalization problems as I left the place after a hectic weekend with a certified legal check for 347,612 euros. My win. I figure if someone looked deep enough, They could find the 392,000 that I put in to walk away with that check. So I lost 40 plus thousand, but what the hell? The casino covered the cost of my stay at the hotel for the weekend, as well as all the expenses of the beautiful 19-year-old French blonde who was keeping me company. She could do something with it. Well, that's another story. What else? The Porsche disappeared and was soon followed by the Volkswagen. I thought about buying myself a new Porsche, but I just resigned myself to it. My dream of owning a Porsche was long ago spoiled. But that didn't stop me from buying an Aston Martin, did it? It's not the top-of-the-line model. The Vantage is plenty good enough for a simple guy like me, and I drove it around town showing it off to everyone and never went back to teach at my old school. "Hi," said the pretty dark-haired beauty with big tits as I parked my Aston outside the restaurant one evening, shortly after buying it. "Hello, beautiful," I said back, already one of the attractive women of all ages who had shown more interest in me since I bought the Aston. "It's Mr. Adams, isn't it?" To my surprise, the cute thing asked me. "Yes," I replied, wondering what she was up to. "You don't recognize me, sir?" The girl grinned at me. "Sir? Sir? It's been months since anyone called me sir." "Mandy Davis, sir," she continued. "I was in 5th grade when you first started teaching at our school." "Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes. The sexy little schoolgirl that all the male teachers lusted after but never dared to do anything about. It happened. We have done it. The two of us ended up in a luxury apartment in La Rochelle on the southwest coast of France. And when we started looking for something other than having sex with each other all day and all night, we bought a boat. There are a lot of them in La Rochelle, and we ended up with a 3-year-old 40-foot yacht, which we rented out in the summer to rich Europeans with me as captain and Mandy as cook and hostess. It was great. No, actually it went on like this for almost 2 years until Mandy's job as a hostess became more important than cooking, and I went in to entertain one of our male guests, a guy who had more money in his piggy bank than I had in the world. We parted as friends, by which time I was already dating the jilted trophy wife of a billionaire, a former model, a Russian girl not much older than Mandy, who was paid several million to free her previous husband. Will this last? No damn idea, but I just think it's possible. Okay, what about Debbie, you're thinking? In my own way, I still loved this girl, but a lot of water has passed under the bridge since then. It's due out in less than 2 years, and he probably thinks I'm still waiting for it. Maybe I am. Or maybe not, and if you saw Elka, my beautiful Russian companion, you would understand why. Now by chance, like that French woman from the casino, Elka could do something to her. No, it doesn't matter. I won't bore you with such trifles. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.